In its 76th year of publication, the New Yorker magazine is widely regarded as a literary and journalistic institution. Since David Remnick took the helm of the magazine 3 years ago, he has successfully nurtured veteran writers, added some new voices, and reformatted the magazine's layout. Earlier this month, the magazine won a record 5 National Magazine Awards, including an award for general excellence. Joining me now, the aforementioned David Remnick. He'd be the editor, and 2 of the writers honored for their work, Malcolm Gladwell and Adam Gopnik. I'm pleased to welcome them back to this table. Congratulations, congratulations.
Okay,
and to you, Charlie. And they are calling you the Joe Torre of editors. You have what feeling about that?
That I feel very old, very galumphy, and bags under my eyes.
From the comparison, or from editing a magazine that gets an award for general excellence?
Well, you feel like the coach and not the player, and suddenly the age washes over you like wet
now,
water.
is there an element of that, in that sense you are now a manager of talent rather than...
Yeah, but the analogy with the Yankees is the good one, because Joe Torre is a terrific manager, but he has what he's got.
Yeah.
I mean, he's got to put on the field an extraordinary lineup of players, and you know, here we have Adam Gopnik, Malcolm Gladwell, and that begins a list.
A roster.
It does not take a genius to publish.
But before you won the awards, you were producing a magazine, editing a magazine that you had pride in and you felt good about. Right. I mean, that comes before the awards.
Sure.
Having said that, do you get the same satisfaction from that?
Awards?
Well, no, from editing as you did from writing.
It's very, very different. It's a completely different kind of satisfaction, and it's a very different activity. John Cheever once gave an interview, and he was comparing writing short stories and novels, and they said they were about as similar as firing a gun and swimming laps in a pool. Writing and editing are as dissimilar as that. They meet at a certain point. You know, a good writer, a really good writer, is a good editor of his own things to a point, or her things, and you know, knows the difference between a sentence that's rhythmically off and a sentence that's rhythmically on, knows how to construct an argument and all these things. And editing has something to do with that as well. But editing is also about managing people and listening, doing a lot of listening, and helping somebody make sense of their own work and intention, and helping them get there, whether through a nod or something more vigorous than that.
What would that be? What would be more vigorous than that?
Well, in the extreme, it means bringing people into the magazine and maybe having certain people not stay any longer. Yeah. That's in the extreme. It has to do with discussing subjects and maybe steering a writer away from a subject that is leading them no place good, and suggesting other things, but without demanding. The magazine is a writer's magazine and should follow the obsessions of those writers. Sometimes, though, a writer hits a wall and really wants some guidance, and it's a trick, a human trick, to know the difference between when a writer wants to be led somewhere or suggested somewhere, and when a writer really just needs to talk and talk out their ideas and talk out their piece before or after. Moving
from, we'll get to what these individual pieces were about in just a second, moving from the sense of maximizing the contribution of talented people and enhancing it in some cases, when did you come to your conclusions about what you wanted the magazine to be, your own stamp on the magazine?
Well, I had some ideas initially about what I wanted the magazine to be when I would start. And some of those things have been borne out. I wanted to see a greater presence of New York City. I wanted to see the I wanted one thing that every editor before me has always wanted, and that is for the magazine to be funnier. And that is, I have to tell you, Charlie, that 3 years of experience tells me that it's the hardest thing in the world. I happen to be sitting with 2 writers who are extremely funny writers when they want to be. And I went to lunch with Roger Angell, who is now on the 81 years old, and has been around for a long time at the New Yorker. And I sat down to lunch glumly, and I said, damn it, you know, the hardest thing is I can get people to go to Sudan and sleep on the ground and write a piece and go anywhere in South Pole or whatever it is, but to get funny things, truly funny things, not just sort of premise humor, ha ha ha, okay, but deeply funny things, whether it's in reporting or in a more standard humor format or cartoons, whatever it may be. That's really hard. And Roger, with the wisdom of years, turned to me and he said, that's interesting, because every single New Yorker editor, and he's knew them all,
yeah, right,
said the exact same thing. It's very, very hard. And so I walk on hot coals to get things that are truly funny. They're very rare.
I know.
Quite rare.
How many people that I know that I've talked to about writing will say the same thing. You know, they'll say, comedy is hard, you know, whatever else you're talking about compared to comedy is hard.
Yeah.
You know. Tell me about your piece.
Well, it was...
Who is Ron?
Ron Popeil.
Yeah.
Ron Popeil is the greatest salesman and inventor, I think, in America.
If you don't know Ron Popeil, you've never watched television.
You've never watched television. And I wanted to write, I was originally attracted to the idea because I wanted to write about infomercials. Because I was at some dinner in Atlanta and I was sitting next to a guy and he was a guy in advertising and he was going on and on about how people completely misunderestimate the power of the infomercial because, in fact, you do want to show somebody something at 2 a.m. That's actually the best time to have someone watching television because they're exhausted, they're lying, they're not switching channels, there's no one talking to them, they're all yours at 2 a.m.
There's no distraction.
And I thought it was I thought it was such a fabulous thought, you know, because if you talk to ad guys, they're always, you know, the consumer is jittery, and is always being interrupted. I was like, well, you know, this is absolutely true. You want channel 47 at 2 a.m. That's when you've got your audience. So I set out to write about infomercials, and then it quickly became clear to me that if you were going to write about infomercials, you had to write about the king of the infomercial, Ron Popeil.
Yeah.
And then, to my delight, Ron turns out to be much more than simply an infomercial guy. He turns out to be, I think, and this is not a joke, actually, I actually think that he is one of the great inventor entrepreneurs of the 20th century. No question about it.
I can tell my favorite part of the piece is about what he would have done if he invented the VCR.
Oh, yes. Well, I imagine. I mean, he has such a distinctive and consumer-friendly approach to inventing. He's passionately interested in how his product will be used. So I tried at one point in the piece to imagine if he did a VCR, he would have done it in such a way that we would never have been confused about how to use it. It would have had big buttons, and it would have had, you know...
Right. It would have turned itself on.
It would have been the tape-o-matic, and it would have been, you know...
Exactly.
But he just is a kind of one of these American originals, and he lives in a big house in the hills in Beverly Hills.
He's made $1 gazillion.
Made $1 gazillion, and, you know, he's lived in this... You know, he doesn't live like some potentate. He's not
Now, how does he create these ideas?
Well, he's a tinkerer, and one of the wonderful things about Ron is that his father, S.J. Popeil, who is also an equally legendary inventor, the man who did the Vegematic and the Slice-O-Matic and the Pocket Fisherman.
It's in the genes.
S.J. Popeil is the author
right. You're talking tradition here.
of one of the single greatest lines. When someone attacked him for the Pocket Fisherman, saying the Pocket Fisherman was a lousy invention.
What is the Pocket Fisherman?
Pocket Fisherman was a
you can pull it out of your pocket and you go fishing.
That you could shrink down. Someone said this is a ridiculous invention. He turned to them, he said, "It's not for using, it's for giving." Which is one of the sort of genius inventor lines.
That's so great.
But S.J., you know, Ron, in distinction to his father was a kind of classic tinkerer, you know, had a car phone in 1960. I mean, it's kind of like, and there was a hilarious story told by this guy who worked with S.J., Ron's father, about when S.J. was trying to come up with a new knife to cut grapefruit. And the idea was that you would have a knife with two parallel blades separated by a fraction of an inch. So you could actually cut along, you know, on either side of the... And in the development, he came up with this idea. It's 3 a.m. one morning, and came to the office the next day and sent his chauffeur. You had a chauffeur take him everywhere. Sent his chauffeur out to the bodega down the street, and they were in a kind of a Latino part of Chicago at that point. And they started buying grapefruits by the box over the course of many, many weeks. And they would bring in piles and piles of grapefruits and try out various versions of this paring knife. Well, you know, this is the legacy of Ron Popeil. This was his father. And so Ron is like that. He is a tinkerer.
Was this your idea, or did some editor at New Yorker say to you?
How can an editor come up with that? Seriously, at the New Yorker, the best ideas, they're almost impossible to come from editors, except for if you're reading really eccentric things. This is a classic example of that.
Right. Like a king.
Oh, this was a piece, an essay or something I wrote about.
This is why you won, right?
Yeah, about having a baby in Paris. Right. This is sort of the kind of the last chapter in our 5-year adventure in Paris. My wife got pregnant again, and it was just about. It wasn't one of the things I set out to write. It just is as we went on through this process, beginning with the fact that all of the obstetricians wore black. You know, nobody ever came out in a white lab coat in the midst of it all. They all wore black, and they all talked a lot about
Black
sex.
lab coats or black?
Black, no,
was
black
just
slacks,
T-shirts
black
and
silk
slacks
shirts,
and stuff,
sort of
right.
open to the navel. They would smoke
Right.
cigarettes, and they would, and so on. So I got to, I thought, well, this is worth writing about.
Yeah.
So I was doing it. Just come back to something though that David was saying about editing, because I used to do some editing, and the thing that always struck me about it was that a writer is in his nature a child. No matter how accomplished you are at it, no matter how many years you've done it, you're always in this kind of childlike position, because you have no idea if you've made a beautiful drawing that they're going to put up on the refrigerator, or if you haven't. And an editor, no matter how young he is in relation to his writers, is a grown-up and has to be a grown-up all the time. And it's this weird thing, because don't you find it? Because it's, as a writer, you can't understand why anybody's doing anything except worrying about your piece. So you turn it in at 9 in the morning, and it's 11:30, and you say, why haven't they called me? You know, is it really that bad? And as an editor, you're constantly saying, it's fine, it's going to be fine. You have to play this paternal, you always have to be in a parent-like role. And it's a very funny.
It's very true, and you know, and the experienced writers know your line of nonsense. If you use the editorial future tense, it will be good. They know something is not quite right yet, and there's only one adequate response to a piece for a writer. And I know this as a writer. It is perfect, not since James Joyce. Anything short of that.
What don't you like about it?
Is, you know, it's like the story.
It is perfect, not since James Joyce.
Not since James Joyce, not since whatever your ideal is. And
Not since whoever.
it's
Not
because
since
you're
William
performing in
Shakespeare.
public.
That wouldn't saystify me, David. It would have to be more along the lines
Of what?
Not since the first Egyptian chiseled into stone
No,
a line.
beyond-
Has
before
there
that.
been,
It was in a
has there
cave.
been so many symbols put down together
I don't
that
want to
have
be lumped.
achieved this effect?
I don't want to be lumped with Joyce or the Egyptians. I'm just saying
Not
that
since Ron
not,
Papil.
not even James Joyce would have come up with. That's what I
Not
want.
even. That's a better line. Not even.
Perfection has at last been
Now,
achieved.
you came here, this was one of the essays you wrote from Paris. Now you're writing, what's it called, the New York
Journal.
The New York Journal. How is it different for you?
Oh, it's totally. Well, for one thing, this is a good example of it. Is that the great advantage I
They
had-
want more copy.
Well, and they also, it's when I was in Paris, the great advantage was people get pregnant and have babies all the time. I couldn't write a piece about getting pregnant and having a baby in New York. Maybe I could sell it to Parenting magazine or something, right? But the great advantage I had in Paris was that the subject there was a difference engine. Domestic manners are one way here, and domestic manners are another way there. And any time you were onto that about something that people were interested in, you had a naturally comic situation because domestic manners differed. But here, domestic manners are our manners. Everybody knows what our domestic manners are, all of our readers and all of the people. So I don't have that as a I hope it wasn't a device, but as a comic engine to motor things. So I've had to try and find an entirely different way of writing.
Ergo, it's harder to find subject matter here now?
It's easier to find. It's as easy to find subject matter. It's, in other words, it's possible to find things that are interesting, but it's harder, at least harder in a sense, to find a natural comic engine to power them. And as a consequence, I think that what it is that in Paris I always could find the large and the small. Just how they did a sonogram said something about French civilization. And here I have to look much more for the small and the large. That is, in the midst of this big, enormous, incredible, strange, bizarre, brutal city, can you find kind of little signs of life, wild parrots in Flatbush, or this derelict railroad bed, or a coffee shop struggling to stay alive? That's, I think, where the life of, for me at least, the life of the city is in small signs of life within a big and almost incomprehensible world. So I'm sort of totally changing the end of the telescope that I'm looking from.
And it can't be funny enough for you, can it?
No, but Adam really disappoints. The thing is that also Adam, we've had a number of Paris correspondents, and they all did radically different things, whether it was Jane Kramer or Janet Flanner or Adam. What Adam did, or part of what he did there, was to create for us. France is an alternate universe, domestically and culturally. It's the one place that really assertively wants to be not America, far more than Britain or some other places that you could name. And that contrast worked as both I think it's fair to say, a domestic comedy and a cultural insight into Americans, because Adam was very much a character in his own pieces in a way that some writers might not dare to do. That was the device that he hit on almost immediately, I think.
Does writing become easier? Or no matter how much you master the craft, it is never any?
I think a little bit. I think
because
I did a piece
understood the language
well,
of writing, or is that what it is, or something?
Well, I think the craft part, if you're paying attention to it and you're reading like a writer and you're paying attention to your own mistakes, it doesn't get easier, but you get better at it. Yeah. I did a piece on Philip Roth last year, and I said to him, awestruck, I said, "You're doing this at a rate of about a novel every 18 months. And he's had this sort of second prime, Sabbath's Theater, American Pastoral, I Married a Communist, et cetera, at a remarkable rate. He said, well, you know, I've been doing this since I'm 21. Maybe I finally learned how to do it. Yeah. Now, he's as good as it gets, and I don't want to speak for him, but I think to some degree good writers learn that doesn't necessarily mean all their best books at the end of their career.
That's what I was getting to, because it is a point, then sometimes people will not produce material that's as good as something they've done previously.
Well, I mean, this is a difficult subject, both as a writer and as an editor. What happens when you know, you feel that you as almost as an orange have squeezed yourself dry after a while? How do you replenish that if you at all can? It's a painful thing. Some writers are able to do this. I mentioned Roth, who's in his early 60s, or Roger Angels just published a book on David Cohn. It's as good as anything he's ever written, and he's 81.
He also has a childlike curiosity. You see him at the game, I mean, he is still so...
And good health. You know, these things, thankfully, conspire to help you.
See, my experience is that you learn a great deal, and you simultaneously forget a great deal, because you lose a certain amount of the kind of naivete or lack of self-consciousness about what you're doing. So as a consequence, with every bit you learn, you forget another bit, so you're always in the state of constant existential dread, teetering. At least for me, I never finish a day's work without feeling that it's time to go, you know, open a restaurant or something.
I guess historically, if you look at it and you're really brutal about it, most artists have a period.
A fertile period.
Yes, I mean, we're doing an arts festival this coming weekend. On Saturday night, as a benefit for Penn, we're doing Bob Dylan, a tribute to Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan has had a remarkable career since he's 20 years old. He's going to be 60 on May 24th. But you have to say that there was this period from about 1963 to 1967 or so where he just wrote at a stunning rate and rewrote the history of American songwriting. Were there great songs afterwards? You bet there was. An album like Blood on the Tracks, and even 1997 there was a terrific album. But there was that one extraordinary period, and I think that holds for most writers as well.
It's terrifying. I think you get 20. You're now you got it down to 4, but I was hoping we had 20 good years, in fact. But I think it's true most artists.
One last question about the New Yorker magazine. Having been honored, I would say the following award: General Excellence, Special Interest, New Yorker Sports Issue. You have how many special interests a year? 4? Fashion, sports?
Fashion. Well, sports is just a one-off.
Books.
We do a books thing. Again, that's not a double issue. It depends on the year.
Okay. Profiles of Pitchman by Malcolm. Essays Like a King by Adam. Reviews and Criticism, 3 pieces by Anthony Lake. We should mention that. The New Yorker Festival runs from May 18th to the 20th. Now, what's the New Yorker Festival?
This is the second year we've done this. It's the biggest arts festival in the city, as it turns out. It began last year when we celebrated our 75th anniversary, doing it again this year. Friday night tonight, there are 15 fiction readings around town. I'm introducing one with Martin Amis and Norman Mailer. It's at that caliber. And Saturday and Sunday, all during the day, there are panel discussions like this with various subjects.
David's interviewing Woody
I'm
Allen.
interviewing Woody Allen. Adam's interviewing Steve Martin. Malcolm is giving a talk on The Tipping Point, which is the book he published last year. Events like this: Saturday night is the Dylan, Sunday is an outdoor poetry reading in Bryant Park at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which anybody can come to. It's a terrific thing.
Good for you. The New Yorker Festival runs, as I said, from May 18th to 20th. Thank you all and congratulations.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. Stay with us.